All right. Welcome. We are live. And let me just do a little intro. So this is the return to our monthly live Q&A. And the purpose of this live Q&A is to connect you with the people that we talk to on our podcast, or to just talk about something interesting, or to get to know you. And so first we release the podcast episode, and then we do a live discussion a couple of weeks after that to make it more interactive so that you can ask your questions directly to our guest, Sanya, and directly to me. So today we're going to talk about turning a traditional career into a soul career. And the reason we decided to talk about that today is because we get a lot of potential clients coming to Soul Career asking, well, I want to know how I can keep my current job but make it more purposeful and more soulful. And we have an amazing example of someone who has been very successful at doing this. That is Sanya Goffe, who I have the immense pleasure of having again today. Sanya is a partner at a prestigious law firm in Jamaica. She sits on multiple boards, including chairing those boards. She started a nonprofit, and she's a wife and a mother, and has a strong interest in philanthropy. Welcome again, Sanya.
Thank you, Lissandra.
And of course, I'm Lissandra Ricketts. I help professionals, executives, and entrepreneurs find meaningful work that's a match with their personalities and help them to build powerful legacies. So let us dive in. If you're joining us now, just type in the comments, where are you coming from? Where are you joining from? We always love to hear from you, our guests, because this live session is, of course, for you, as always. So I'm going to kick things off with my first session for Sanya, though, while you guys decide what kind of questions you want to ask her about law or about turning your traditional career into a law career. So Sanya, my first question for you is just to recap, like we talked on the podcast about how can a traditional career in law become your soul career. So do you remember the advice that you gave? Can we just recap what advice we gave in the podcast?
So I'm not sure if I remember everything I said, but I think one of the main focuses in my response was just being authentic. So one, appreciating that law may seem very glamorous on the outside, but the truth is it's a lot of work, and it's no different than any other career path. You have to put in the work to see the rewards, and whatever those rewards may be for you, whether it be monetarily, whether they may be self-validation, rising in status, whatever you may be actually seeking, making a contribution, you have to put in the work. And also, I think in terms of law, the legal fraternity and the legal practice specifically, you have to think about the practice areas that really suit your energy and your personality. So, not all practice areas are created the same. And in fact, over time, traditional practice areas are morphing and changing. And so you really need to think carefully about what you want to put in. So for example, litigation is a demanding practice area. You have to be in the courts. You're constantly in a combative type of posture and a combative type of environment. Is that something that you really want? Is that the kind of pull on your energy that you really want? There may be real estate transactions and conveyancing and property work, which is requires a lot of detailed knowledge of the law, but it's not the pull on your energy and time is different. For me, I do a lot of capital markets transactions, so the pressure comes in stints. So you're under pressure to complete a transaction. Oftentimes there's a lot of money at play, so you feel that pressure from clients to get the deal done. Capital markets transactions require very detail-oriented, I think attorneys who can focus on all the little strands that need to be pulled together. If that's not your skill set, maybe this may not be the practice area for you. So really being true to yourself and I know that phrase is really cliched, but it's true. Really think to yourself, what are my skill sets? What are my talents? Where are my strengths? And does this practice area really, line up with that?
Yeah. So remember to ask your questions to Sanya. Get those questions going in the chat. In the meantime, I want to follow up on that, Sanya, with, I am an ENFP, which is a free-spirited personality type on the Myers-Briggs. So I love variety, I love people, I love creativity. And so if I were in a traditional banking or law job, and let's talk specifically about law, where would I fit in the law world?
Well, maybe someone like with your personality might feel more comfortable in entertainment law or law that deals with a lot of creatives. So and there's a need for legal support in those areas. We have a lot of persons who are doing kind of doing their own entrepreneurial activities. They're doing, they're branching out and they want to break away from the traditional space, but they need legal support. And they see big law firms as scary and expensive. So they know they need the legal support, but in their minds, they're not able to find good talent because they think it kind of resides in the law firm environment. But the truth is that there are a lot of smaller law firms, there are a lot of sole practitioners who can bring that kind of support. So that would be an area where you might find that, your interests align with your law practice. What I would say as well is, for those of your listeners who are not necessarily looking for legal support, but looking to enter the legal fraternity, but are creatives who need legal support, I would caution them not to find their law support online, because there are a lot of times they just go hunting for some precedent or some contract, they pull it down off Google and they think they're good, but not appreciating that there are nuances in the Jamaican legal landscape that certain provisions don't apply or certain things, just won't work. And so, it's important to get that legal support. Lawyers are a necessity. It's just finding that right talent. So I would say maybe in, entertainment, that creative space would be good.
So you would have to think about the clients that you're serving. And so someone like me would want to serve clients who are more creative in order for myself to get that creativity, maybe from being a lawyer. Whereas if I was serving bankers like you are, perhaps I wouldn't be as soulful in that practice. So we have a question from someone on LinkedIn, which is, are you actually passionate about practicing law, Sanya, or is it just that you're good at it and, you've climbed your way up? Is it actually your passion? And if
is
not,
practicing law your passion?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I would say is that is practicing law my passion? I would say that I've found the practice areas that make me excited. Mm-hmm. And I feel good about that. And I feel good that I've found a practice area or practice areas that allow me to make a contribution, a meaningful contribution to nation building. So I enjoy capital markets work. I actually get excited by the deals. I like when the deals close. I like when clients are happy. I like when the deadlines are met. I like that. And so I guess the answer is yes on the capital markets. Pensions law, I enjoy it as well. But for me, my practice in pensions is so driven by that need to see retirement security improvement in Jamaica. Mm-hmm. And that's what it feeds. It feeds that passion for nation building and making a contribution, because volunteerism is such a part of my just kind of my being. And whilst I'm not a volunteer in terms of I practice, I actually provide a legal service. There's so many ways in which my practice in pensions law has spin-offs in terms of making contributions that are voluntary in nature. Yeah. So the answer would be yes. But I'll be honest, there are some matters that drive me bonkers. I'm annoyed. It's the most frustrating transaction. The client is annoying. I mean, there are many. I wouldn't want to give the impression that every day I get up, I just love every single transaction and every single client is just great. No, there are annoying transactions. There are frustrating transactions that I struggle to find the answer for the client. You have clients that you do all the work and then they don't pay. I mean, those are really annoying situations. So, I mean, the realities of running any business, right? Where you're client facing, I have some of the same challenges, but yeah. I can tell you that I definitely have found a space that I'm happy in. Yeah. And there are a lot of colleagues of mine who are in the fraternity and they're just frustrated. They've been working in an insurance company for 15 years. And for some reason, they just never, ever got out. to do something else, and now they're 15 years in, 18 years in, and they feel like they can't do anything else, and so they feel trapped. Because to start in a new practice area is as if you're starting, in many cases can be as if you're starting straight out of law school, depending on what you're transitioning to. And so I am lucky that I haven't been trapped in that way. I've definitely have seen where doors have opened, and God has been really amazing where I've stepped into practice areas that really feel good.
Yeah. So my takeaway from what you're saying is that you have to, early on in your law career, figure out what practice makes you feel passionate and follow that energy, that feeling of joy and passion and flow and focus into the practice area, so that years down the line, you don't find yourself trapped when it's too late to change. Would that be some good advice?
Yeah,
find it
I would
early.
say that. And I would say, though, that I recognize that not all young attorneys will have the luxury of kind of testing a bunch of different practice areas.
Yeah.
And that's where mentorship and finding senior counsel, older attorneys, when I say older attorneys, I mean attorneys who've been at the bar for longer, who can give you some perspective on different practice areas. Shadow them if you can. I've had a few, this was during COVID though, so we really weren't able to facilitate, but a few young attorneys or persons, law students who are interested and they weren't sure what they wanted to do, asking if they could just shadow me for a couple of weeks just to get a sense of what a corporate capital markets practice looks like. Yeah. Similarly, shadow a litigator. They're happy. Many of them are happy to have you accompany them to court. You get a chance to observe and you'll know very early, okay, this is not for me. I can tell you very early, I knew litigation was not my strength at all. Yeah. My husband, Gavin, is an excellent litigator. He's very, very good, but I'm somebody who I'm very methodical. I need to think very carefully about the next move. I want to research. I want to, Gavin is quick on his feet, fast thinker, very articulate. So if you have certain skill sets, litigation will feel easy to you. For me, I mean, just the thought of driving down to the Supreme Court, I'm like, okay.
So my guess, based on what you're saying, is that your Myers-Briggs test result would say ENTJ or ESFJ. That's my guess. So I want you to take it and tell me what the result is. Or do you know?
The funny thing is that I did it a few years ago. Gavin reminded me, but I don't remember the results. But I'm going to do it. I definitely am.
I want to know for sure. Okay, guys. So remember, this is your chance to ask Sanya your questions live so she can answer them live. So ask, type. And in the meantime, until you guys get your questions going, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about traditional corporate culture, which has changed a lot globally post the pandemic, right? So we have a lot more remote working, a lot more flexibility in how we show up to work, because if we're working from home, maybe we don't show up in full formal office wear and so on. Are you seeing those changes reflected in law as well? Or has law just bounced back to prior pre-COVID protocols?
Well, I can really speak from HMF, my law firm's approach. So, of course, initially when the COVID hit, right, we were like, everybody was in shock. So everybody just went home. So after the initial 2 weeks when we came out and peeked out from our caves and realized that, okay, this is what the reality that we're dealing with, we definitely had a strict work from home policy. And I think most, corporate environments had that. So strict work from home policy. And then over time, we started to kind of layer in people coming in. So it was more scheduled for staff members to come in on certain days. So we didn't have everybody in at the same time. Now it's pretty much back to normal. Mm-hmm. We have strict mask protocols. You need to wear the mask in or outside your office. No, we don't have, we have restrictions on the number of persons in a shared space, like in the kitchen or, meeting rooms or whatever. But we definitely don't have a rule that you have to come in. So if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel like you need to stay home, if your home environment is such that it's best that you work from home for a while, that's fine. And the truth is, HMF generally has had a relaxed work environment, in that, we're not strict on, you don't have to wear a suit to come to work. You don't have, we expect you to turn up, and turn up doesn't mean physically turn up. Mm-hmm. Turn up, get the work done, ensure the client's needs are serviced. And if you need to be present in a meeting, we expect you to be dressed accordingly. So we don't police things like that here. We don't police the associates. We feel that if by the time you're out of law school and you're at this firm, you understand the minimum expectations. And we found that our associates have done really well where that's concerned, and the partners continue to support in all the ways that are required. So,
Yeah.
so to that extent, I would say, but I do know, just kind of through the grapevine, that there are some of the other traditional firms that have also kind of relaxed their approach to working from home. So that's approach to kind of coming into the office.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things with COVID, and I'm sure you've seen, it's been an accelerator of change in so many ways, and a mindset that a corporation probably would not have otherwise embraced. They're like, this is not bad. I'm actually still seeing productivity, and people are feeling more comfortable. What I would say though is, for some people, we glamorize work from home sometimes. So it's so great, right? So you have on a nice blouse, but pajama bottoms, or you're chilling, and there's a space for that. But Lysandra, I truly feel that there is a social capital that gets eroded when you're not able to physically interact with your peers. And we have to be very careful about that. And I think companies, and even my law firm, we need to think carefully about ensuring that we don't overlook the value that places. I know safety-wise, we can't do much about it, but when we get there, when we get on the other side of COVID, whatever that will look like, whenever that comes, we have to ensure that we think carefully about restoring some of that social capital that is going to get eroded. Yeah.
I'm glad you made that point, because I was going to ask you, why go back to the office at all? Because, a legal work is service. It's a service-driven business. So you don't necessarily have to be in the office to get the work done. You may have to meet with a client here and there. So should the office become more of a co-working hot desk setup? Come in when you need to, work from home when you need to. But I'm glad you made that point about that social cohesion and that camaraderie that comes from being in a shared space and rebuilding that in the workplace. So I want to get to another question that we have here from Angelita on YouTube. We look beautiful. You always look beautiful, Sanya. Oh my gosh. Boss lady goals. She would love to hear, what are your top 3 work ethics rules that you apply in your career? This question is so interesting because it makes me feel like, work ethics rules. Oh my God. Okay, you start first, Sanya, and then I have something to say about it.
Okay, so let's bounce, right? So I'll do my first one. My first one in terms of work ethics is, in terms of specifically the legal practice, is being honest in billing. It's so, you have to be very careful not to find yourself being tempted to not ethically charge clients, right? So, and it's easy to go down that road. And I've seen pairs who there's just no way that fee is justified, right? And so one thing in particular is being very ethical and authentic in why and how you bill your clients. And the best approach to that is having honest and upfront discussions with clients about what this service is going to cost. In some respects, the client or the potential client cannot afford this law firm service, and that's just what it is. And being willing and able to have that discussion frankly and refer the client to a law firm that might, or a lawyer that might be more compatible with where they are. So having the conversation with the client about billing and being ethical with billing. Tied to that is, no matter what type of client, showing up in the same exact way. So you may have a big corporate deal with a big corporate client, blue chip company in Jamaica, one of the top. Show up and provide that service in the very same way, with the same attention to detail, the same,
I love that.
The same attitude, the same energy as you would for your friend who just needs a will for their mom. That it's the smallest thing. It's such a small transaction. It's not a big deal. It's nothing in terms of fees. You might not even be charging, but showing up in the same way, the same attention to detail. So those are top 2 things that I always I try to remind myself. And the third, I know we said we both, but let me just finish up, is having an attitude of excellence. There'll be times when I would say, okay, you can be tempted. I don't want to use the word shortcut, but you could be tempted to maybe not double check the legislation because you're pretty sure you know what it says. And no, always reminding myself, have that attitude of excellence. That standard is excellent. So pull the legislation, even if you think you know it already, even if you're so confident in your knowledge of the area, never be afraid to pull the legislation again or to go back to your sources. And that's actually something I learned from Sandra Minor Phillips, who is a senior partner of Queen's Counsel at Miles Fletcher. Sandra is one of the most esteemed attorneys in Jamaica. And I remember when I worked at MFG and I was junior with her on a particular matter, she would always pull the CPR, the civil procedure rules. Now, Sandra could have probably written them. She could probably write them in her sleep. She knows them so well. But she always said, always go back to the source, always double check. Because sometimes over time, you start to imagine what the legislation says. You know it so well, you start to, summarize it. And keywords get replaced in your mind just as time goes on. So always going back to the source to ensure that you're that much more precise in your advice and your instructions to clients.
I love that, because when I hear the word ethics, I feel like, well, that word makes me feel bound, and I consider myself a free spirit. But there is a moral code that I live by with my clients, and listening to you outline yours reminds me that, yes, I do live by some very high standards of excellence, giving your 100% to every client, no matter what, going all in. Also, the last thing you said about going back to the source, I always try to go to the data, the primary data.
Right.
I don't like to look at other people's analysis of the data. I like, it's much easier to read an article in the newspaper than to go to the source document that generated that article. But exactly. I like to go, I was a researcher in my very first life. And so I like to go straight to the data and glean my own analysis from that. And then, of course, I always try to operate with integrity. So to your point about billing, if I had offered a discount code to a client a year ago and it should have expired, and they come back and they're like, well, I still have this code, I'm not going to nickel and dime a client. I'm going to always keep to my word, and what I say I'm going to do, I will honor that and deliver that. So Catherine, I think Catherine is based in the US, is asking, she clearly listened to the podcast, because in the opening of the podcast, we talk about you being a US citizen, Sanya, and that you decided not to move to the US, but to stay in Jamaica. So Catherine is asking, did you give up opportunities to work abroad? And what was your reason for choosing to stay and build your career in Jamaica? And for me, I moved back here, right? So I can respond to that after you go.
Okay. So Catherine, thanks for your question. And Lysandra is correct. We actually touched on this really early in the podcast. But so I was born in the US and I lived there till I was about 2 or 3, and my parents returned to Jamaica. So so all I've known really is Jamaica. My entire high school, prep school, university was, I was in Jamaica, and then when it came to tertiary education, I chose to stay here. And I explained in the podcast that, when I see myself as Jamaican, right? So I never really had an attraction to study overseas, study in the US, I should say. I did explore the UK, and that didn't materialize the way I had wanted. And so, and the truth is, in retrospect, I'm glad it didn't. But anyway, so I went to university here. So I went to the law school here. I got a great job at the time. Well, at the time, the best law firm. Of course, I'm at a different law firm now, so at least space for my firm at the top. But so I never really thought about it. I never really felt attracted to leave Jamaica to explore job opportunities. I'm not saying that I'm close to it, but I really do see, certainly right now, my contribution being here in Jamaica. And there's just so much that I want to be a part of when it comes to retirement security. I know I get it. People are like, why is this exciting for you? But it is. And there are just so many opportunities. I mean, not just from the pension law practice, not just from being a president of the PIAJ. I was recently appointed to the board of the NIS, which is essentially our social security system. And the thought of being at the table to start making a contribution for improving retirement security for low-income workers, low-wage workers, that's exciting to me. That's exciting to being able to be at the table to make that contribution. Sitting as chairman of Stratos. Stratos is an alternative investment fund that's going to create investment opportunities for pension funds. That's better returns for beneficiaries. That's increasing the prospect of retirement security. So just seeing how the different roles in which I'm able to play can really contribute to that goal, I see that as where I should be. That affirms for me, this is where you are right now. And I'm happy for it.
I love the passion that you speak with. You can just hear she starts talking faster and gets really passionate whenever you talk about pensions. I've never heard pensions be spoken about with such passion. For me, Catherine, I moved back to Jamaica because I felt that I was in corporate America at Bain in New York and at Harvard Business School and so on. And I loved my experience there. I was there during the Great Recession. And the reason I decided to move back to Jamaica was I had burnt out in my career in the US very early. I did a very rigorous undergraduate program at the University of Chicago. I was on the PhD track in economics. And then I went straight into Harvard Business School, basically, straight into Bain in New York, working crazy hours. I was in the private equity group at Bain. And by the end of that experience, I was tired and I wanted to reconnect with the core of who I was and not just push forward on this persona, the corporate persona, but really integrate the human side of me and the work side of me. And so I came back to Jamaica to regroup and decided to stay here because I felt my human spirit more here. I was able to work and have an impact, like you're saying, Sanya, and go to the beach on the weekends and just be a human being as well as a human doing, which is what I find American corporate culture to be very do. That's going to change now, though, and I'm so grateful for it. And I do a lot of work with clients who are based in the US around how work is changing and how we can bring our human nature to work. So we have another question.
What I would say, Ms. Sandra, no, I really want your listeners to listen to the podcast that you did. That you shared with me, because that was just such an interesting insight into that journey that you took coming back to Jamaica. I mean, I really felt like I was living the experiences with you through the whole thing. Because so much of what you've outlined, University of Chicago, working at Bain, Harvard University, I mean, those are impressive accomplishments. And then for you to walk away from all of that and what would be the obvious doors I could imagine that you'd have walked through to come back to Jamaica, that must have been a lot of soul searching on your part. So, I mean, it's your listeners really need to listen to your podcast, because I felt I got to know you in that, just listening to that podcast more than I think, we would have 30 minutes of coffee.
Yeah. So the podcast that Sanya is talking about is one where I was a guest on somebody else's podcast, Abdulaziz out of Canada. His podcast is called Made to Lead. And I talked about the impact that stress had on my decisions and the stress levels I had, that I thought I was going to end up in the hospital if I kept going at the pace that I was going. And I really came back here to be healthy, to find a healthy human way to work. And now I share that with my clients from all over the world, Japan, the US, Europe, all over. We have so many questions coming in. Yes, guys, keep engaging. Okay, so let's start with Jodianne McFarlane from YouTube. How did you navigate challenges related to gender stereotypes and your belief in your efficacy as a leader while pursuing your professional career? Okay, so gender and the impact of being a woman. Sanya.
Julian, I love that question. Could we leave it up a little bit? Is that possible? Is it possible to leave up the question? Mm-hmm. Right. So a couple of things, Julian. So
I'm trying to get above the comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, no. So I'm sorry. Okay, right. So a couple of things. One, so there are two things that have been challenging at different points in terms of sitting on the boards and kind of making space for yourself professionally, is gender and age. Now, time takes care of age, right? So over time, nobody's going to see you as the young attorney who you have to struggle for a voice. Time doesn't take care of being a woman in the room. And that's just real. And the funny thing is that going through the Eisenhower Fellowship and some of the women leaders I met as a result of the fellowship, it's just so funny that gender continues to be something that plagues them into their 40s, 50s, 60s. And I can't say that it's a challenge that I don't continue to face. Sometimes you have to be that much louder, that much bolder to be heard. There are times you're in a room where you're making a point, and until it's endorsed or corroborated by a male counterpart, that's when you feel as if people are listening. And that, I think you have to take the approach, the solution to that is a case-by-case solution based. In other words, some environments you need to, or some situations, I think the right approach is to press and to be a little bit more aggressive. Sometimes the approach needs to be just watch this one, just watch this environment. Let's just let this one play out, or let this one slide. There are a couple of times when I've had to have out of the room conversations with someone to say, okay, is it just my imagination? Because I see something happening here. Sometimes the struggle is not necessarily with another man, it's with another woman who doesn't give you space to breathe in a meeting or in an environment. And I often say to myself, let me not ever become that woman who wants to crowd out or outspeak a younger woman in the room, or just a fellow woman in the room, even if it's not a matter of age. So it continues to be a challenge. And I'm very prayerful about these situations as well. So I'm a Christian, and I honestly believe that I have to get guidance. I can't always, I don't always have the right answers. And there will be times, honestly, I would have left a meeting or left a conversation, and I would be upset with myself for allowing the other person to outspeak me or cut me off or whatever it may be. So I don't always get it right. And there are times when I'm just like, I really should have not let that happen to me, And there are times when I don't let it happen to me and I get really upset. And I, on reflection, I'm like, oh, you really could have just let that one go, So I don't always get it right. So it's a constant struggle. What I want to do is validate that if you do experience those challenges, you're not alone. Like I said, I've met some senior women, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and they're saying, yeah, I experience this even in those environments. And then the last thing around the last question as a leader while pursuing your professional career. Okay, so the other thing I would say is that I think sometimes I over imagine my confidence deficit. So what I mean is that my biggest obstacle has been myself. I overthink things. I question myself, and I spend a lot of time, second guessing my ability when that confidence deficit, which we all have, is not as big as you see it to be. And that I think, kind of getting over myself continues to be a challenge as well. I don't always see myself the way others see me, and that can set you back. And that's something I think as women, I think we struggle with more than our male counterparts. Mm-hmm. Why? I don't know, but I don't think it's the same struggle. And so that continues to be something I work on, and reminding myself that I'm in this room for a reason. I'm at this table for a reason. That's something that came up just with the Eisenhower the other day, the Eisenhower Fellowship. And we can talk some more about that later. But, when you're in a space with 24 other women who are leaders in their respective spaces, and you're like, whoa, I've never been in a virtual room with 24 other type A individuals, driven, motivated, getting things done. And you're just like, how did I get here, right? Mm-hmm. So those are things that I continue to work on. But I think the biggest victory for me has been the mindfulness of it, being aware that it's happening, being contemplative and saying, okay, let me step back for a minute. And of course, I always go back to my village. I have a strong, strong village, and outstanding women in my life who continue to encourage me and lift me up, So.
Sure. I just have one quick comment on this because I think you laid it out so well. For me, ageism has been more of a challenge than gender in the Caribbean, because the Caribbean has the largest percentage of women managers and leaders than anywhere else in the world. And Jamaica is actually number one, according to the World Economic Forum, for women managers. 56% of managers in Jamaica are women. And Dominican Republic is number one in the world for senior executives and board members who are women. And so the Caribbean is a little bit different, but where I see the gender issue come up is in tuning out to what you're saying versus tuning in. And for me, I've gotten feedback, oh, your voice is high pitched, so you sound younger and more feminine. And so I kind of tune out that higher pitched voice. I've actually heard that.
Somebody said that to you?
So I have to, if I'm in a very formal room, a political room or a boardroom, I have to be more authoritative, Lysandra, to be heard. And it's something that I'm actually very aware of, that your leadership presence is very stereotyped in a lot of communities where a leader sounds like this. So you have to talk like this in order to be seen as a leader. So that is there's a gender component of that as well.
Right.
So we have a lot of questions. All right, so let's get through these. Claudine, I love this question, by the way. Claudine is saying, loving this conversation. Actually, autocorrect always autocorrects your name from Sanya to Santa. I've actually seen that quite a few times.
Yes,
so
it happens to me.
Gifting us with these gems today. Okay, but Sanya, what was it like to grow up as a twin, number one? And number two, how do you manage Gavin's wit? So Gavin is your husband, and he is a known Twitter influencer with a lot of wit. So how do you manage his wit?
Okay, so I love that question, Claudine. Thank you. So, so growing up as a twin was really, to be honest, my parents didn't raise us as twins. I know that sounds weird. So we were never dressed alike. We have two completely different names. They don't start with the same letter. They don't rhyme. So I'm Sanya. My twin is Leanne. And then also it does help that she's actually, when I say does help in terms of we're not identical. So she's actually more fair skinned, like your complexion, Lysandra. And we have slightly different body types as well. So different interests growing up. So I was more into sports. She was more into arts, like dance and art and craft and that kind of thing. She went into all these big art competitions we used to have in Jamaica, winning prizes. We actually had a semi-senile art teacher in prep school who mixed us up, right? She always thought that we were one and the same. So I would always get an A for art because I think she thought I was my twin. So we both got A's for art, but certainly I can't say I was an A student in art. But anyway, so we weren't raised as twins. So we were encouraged to pursue our separate interests. My parents had a special request at Mona Prep, which was that we were never in the same class. So we were always in different classes in prep school. She went to St. Andrews. I went to Campion. She hightailed it out of Jamaica as soon as A-levels were finished. I stayed. So we grew as sisters. I can tell you, I forget sometimes I have a twin. Like I remember, I forget that she's a twin. So I mean, we're very close now, etc. But we don't have that. We were never raised kind of like your friends are my friends. We're one and the same. It was never like that. And I must tell you, I respect my parents for that. I am so grateful that they raised us to be individuals and to think separately, to lead your separate lives, to pursue your dreams separately. I know a lot of, I have a few friends who are colleagues who are twins as well, and they're best, they can't think about doing something or living in another country without their twin sister. I don't know that at all. So we're very close. We weren't always close, of course. I mean, growing up through high school, we had the same sibling issues that, plague every household. But we are, I never felt that kind of sameness. And I'm glad that my parents made that decision, that we would have our own friends, our own interests. So that's that. Managing Gavin's wits. I find it interesting that you say managing or handling. I think I wasn't sure the word. So Gavin, so remember, I would have known Gavin from when I was a child. I'm not sure if you listened to the podcast, but from when I was 11, Gavin and I have been friends, right? So he's always been like this. He's just gotten wittier. So he's always been like this. So growing up as friends in high school, you had to have thick skin to have Gavin as your friend. So he's always teasing you, always grabbing you. That was always the relationship. And that's how he is with all friends. If you don't know him, if Gavin teases you, it means he likes you. So some people get really sensitive, and I'm like, no, honey, he likes you. That's a good thing. So I know my family and my twin, because some things that they're like, okay, is that supposed to be funny? And I'm like, yeah, that's Gavin's way of saying he likes you. So yeah, I'm accustomed to it. Yeah. What I would say in terms of social media and his wit on social media, I often say that in this new kind of dispensation, I'm not sure you can call it new anymore, couples need to have social media policies. So, you go to marriage counseling and you talk about who's going to cook and are you going to have children or whatever you ask in marriage counseling. It's been so long. But you need to talk about that social media policy, right? So Gavin's very active on social media. I tend not to be as active. I tend to be very, very specific about the things I will comment on or get involved in. Gavin kind of just loves the excitement and, and sometimes I'm like, why are you even getting into that? But that's what he likes. So anyway, so it's not something that's really to handle. It's I've known him, he's been like this, always. And as I've always said, I married my brethren, I married a friend, and so in many respects, some of the things that I think if I were to meet him now would not be as, maybe it's more challenging.
Well, I follow Gavin on Twitter, where he is a king. He's the king of Twitter, in the law Twitter in Jamaica. And he wrote a tweet about the video podcast on YouTube that it was the best interview you've ever done. And so he drove an army of people to YouTube to watch the video. And it's now the most watched video of our YouTube channel, which is amazing. So that is the power of his influence on social media.
And he's also pushed for change. I mean, you've seen where public officials have responded. Like he's agitated for change in a lot of areas, Yeah. But so anyway, kudos to Gavin.
Mm-hmm. All right, where are we now? Okay, so Mark Husam, which is a friend of mine, just had a comment for you, Sanya, that he has spent 2 decades in the financial world. I know he's worked in Canada and Asia and in Jamaica, and he can second that he's never heard someone speak about pensions with so much passion. So great comment there. Yolanda has a question for you on networking to find new clients, because, a lot of organizations, especially post-pandemic, how do they bring clients into the door? Has this been an issue for your firm? And if so, how have you overcome this?
Okay, so it hasn't really been an issue for me here at HMF in terms of networking. So we have a good client base, clients come in, we have a lot of repeat clients. So that's not been a challenge here at HMF. What I will say though, and this is advice that it's not original, that I received from a senior attorney many, many, many years ago, is that a lot of young attorneys, and I think this applies to young professionals generally, try to network up. You shouldn't try to network up, network across. Mm-hmm. So the relationships that you see a senior attorney might have, and I'm using the law because that's my frame of reference, with, let's say, one of the top corporate sons of Jamaica, the leader of a big bank. Sometimes you say, how can I get that relationship? How can I get that network in? That relationship didn't start. That started when they were both kind of moving up the ranks, and that relationship built. So you're not going to necessarily network as, 2 years at the bar and land the biggest CEO in Jamaica. It's unlikely to happen that way. So what you do is you network across. So you network with your colleagues and your peers who are where you are professionally. And those relationships grow and strengthen. And they will get to a place where your colleague becomes the big CEO and he doesn't do a transaction unless you are the attorney. Mm-hmm. Or he doesn't do a financial deal unless you are his financial advisor. Or you're the person who has given him I've had a client who has said to me, he's working on a transaction and the other side wants to use a particular law firm, not ours, no problem. And he said, I don't care how we do it, but there's no way we're doing this transaction unless HMF is a part of this deal. Mm-hmm. So we find a role for my law firm because he needs us in the room with eyes on the deal. And this is a colleague who I went to high school with. So he's top CEO in his organization, but his organization is growing. And as my professional practice is growing, we're growing together and the networking is kind of in step. So that was I think that was sound advice I received years ago. We tend to think as young professionals, okay, how do I get, a big CEO? How do I network it up? You need to network across. And what I would say as well is good work begets good work. Yeah. So you put that work in, as in you do good work, you will get good work.
I love that because that's a very nuanced perspective on networking that is not often shared. The advice for networking is very different from what you just shared in general. People usually say, well, reach out on LinkedIn or go to the right conferences and the right seminars. But you're actually very right. 10 years ago, when we all graduated from Harvard Business School, we were all peers and we kept a strong connection. And now 10 years later, my peers are running billion-dollar companies in Turkey, or they just sold their startup for $200 million. And now we're still peers and they want to support me and they want to help Soul Career grow. And that's been amazing. So I love what you just shared. All right. Next up, we have Kamoy. Hi, Kamoy. Welcome from YouTube. So let me get above the comment. Okay. I started working in one of my dream goals. So Kamoy is actually based in New York, but Caribbean heritage and really wanted to work with Caribbean companies, right? So she just started working in one of her dream roles with a Jamaican-owned startup that was just funded to the tune of a couple $1 million. What are your top 3 tips for remote workers to truly make an impact to support the organization and as well as her future growth?
Top 3. Okay. I think one of the biggest I don't know if I have 3, but what I say is the biggest challenges with remote working is it somehow can feel like you're disconnected from the client. And it's easy to get the work done, but as I said before, you kind of lose that human connection and human touch. So keeping in touch and regular communication with clients using different modes of communication, I think is important. Yeah. Clients often want to know that you're in touch with them, even when you don't have something to tell them. So in my case, you may be trying, working out a knotty transaction for a client or a knotty matter, and you don't have an answer yet. But the client hasn't heard from you. So they're like, are you working on my matter? What's going on? And I found that even with the absence of meetings and being able to keep in touch with clients physically, what has helped to keep that connection is always keeping clients updated, always being in touch, even when you don't have something to tell them. They understand that your matter is on the front burner. I haven't forgotten you. This is where we are, even if where we are is nowhere more further than where we were last week. So keeping in touch is important for me. And I think as well, utilizing the tools. So, a lot of clients want to, for me, I notice a difference in terms of how clients want to engage. So I still find some of my older clients, in terms of age, wanting to come in for a meeting. And I find that so bizarre. I'm like, why are we still talking about physical meetings? And then there's some clients who are fine with using WhatsApp. No, I don't like that. So I'm always insisting on having video calls, turning on a video, because that makes a difference than if I'm staring at, some,
blank screen.
Blank screens or initials. And so that also helps using the tools in terms of staying connected. But I'm not sure if the answers are any different because it's remote. In other words, that advice kind of plays across the field. But it's easy to drop back into a feeling that I don't need to stay as connected with clients because I'm not seeing them as much. And you get pulled into just getting the work done. So I'm not sure if I've answered the question, but I would just say keep connected, utilize tools that give you FaceTime with clients, and also, like I said, always update clients and keep them informed even when you don't have much to tell them.
Yeah, and I would jump in on that because all of our team at Soul Career, or coaches or content manager, Natalie, who is actually on the back end here, or all of our team or graphic designers are remote. So Pakistan, Germany, New York, California, Florida, right? And so what's really important is that check-in. So we have scheduled weekly check-ins. That's number one, which you discussed. Really important to stay in touch and for the team themselves to feel like they're in touch with me and what's happening in the company as well. And the second piece is objectives, right? So an agenda for each meeting that's based on the objectives for that role. And are we making progress towards that role? Because the current professional really wants to feel that mobility and moving towards an end result. So that clear goals and that check-in is really important for remote workers. Okay, so we're getting lots of great comments too from Erin, who said she really loved the points on how to build confidence and leaning on your village for support and being very mindful and aware of what you bring to the table. Love that from Erin. We have Boss Lady Goals. Of course, Sanya is Boss Lady Goals for sure. Thank you so much for your authenticity and sharing, Sanya. This is very helpful from Kemoy. And then, of course, Sanya, very engaging and authentic. So we have time for one more question. So if you have a question, get it in there. If not, I can ask a question that I've been wanting to ask that we didn't get to on the podcast. So let me give you a couple seconds. So I'm going to ask my question, Samuel, which is about the Eisenhower Fellowship. What is this thing that you keep talking about? And why did you go for it? And what are you doing in it? Like, tell us about that fellowship.
Listen, I get so excited talking about the Eisenhower Fellowship. It was amazing. So essentially, Eisenhower Fellowships is a fellowship program established in honor of Dwight Eisenhower. In fact, it was a gift to him establishing the foundation. And it really looks at pulling together global leaders, or leaders across the globe, I should say, who are committed to advancing the agenda of prosperity, fairness, equality for all. And so they select individuals who are making contributions in their home countries, in their home communities, that advance these pillars. And the fellowship has different types of fellowships. So one year they may have a fellowship for Latin America and the Caribbean, or this year, when I said this year was 2020, a fellowship for women. Sometimes they have a global leadership fellowship. Now, the key about the fellowship is that your country has to be selected to put forward a candidate for consideration. So you can't just, next year Jamaica may not be considered for the Women's Fellowship, or may not be considered for global. So anyway, so Jamaica was on the list for the Women's Leadership Fellowship. And I was encouraged by Sandra Glasgow, who was a fellow in 2000, to apply. And I had a rigorous interview process locally, and then a series of interviews by overseas panels, right? So that all took place remotely, but it was interesting. And I was selected. So one of the things you have to
indicate. Of course you were, Sanya. Oh my God, you're like the most.
Right, so I was selected. I one of the things you had to indicate though was what's your contribution? What's your project? What are you going to be working on if you were to be chosen for the fellowship? And of course, mine was retirement security. And at the time, I actually focused on low-income workers and old age, low-income and informal workers. But as the fellowship progressed, I realized that no, this whole issue of attacking retirement security and ensuring that we have a robust pension framework for Jamaica is a multifaceted one. And low income and informal workers require one particular solution. Formal workers require another. Creatives when I say creatives, I mean sole practitioners, entrepreneurs may require another. And so how are we going to kind of attack this problem? And so that was really exciting. So I met with the leaders at the World Bank, the IDB, OECD, top think tanks across the United States, persons looking at putting in place micro-pension arrangements in places as far-flung as the Solomon Islands, Fiji Islands. It was amazing. And of course, it just got my little pension thing going, because what you do is that your program is curated. So my program would not be somebody else's. So I was paired with persons who are doing some of the same work I want to do. Persons who are at the cutting edge of research around behavioral economics and retirement security, and why people make the choices they make, etc. So that was exciting because it fed right into what was my focus. But what makes me so excited about Lissandra, remember, I didn't have that international university experience that you had. So you went to the University of Chicago, you went to Harvard, so you'd have met people from all over the world. In your company now, you have people from all across the world working with you. So that international exposure is something you had from very early. I made a choice to stay in the Caribbean. So as much as I would have met people from other islands, there's a very strong common thread that rolls through all the islands, right?
Yeah.
And whilst I may know something is uniquely Kittian and something that's particularly St. Lucian, there's a Caribbean identity that's very, very strong. And so I didn't have that international exposure. So for the first time in a real way, even though I travel a lot, Gavin and I travel all the time, I wasn't really in a very intimate, concentrated environment with women or anyone from across the globe. And I think that was such an exciting part of it for me. Meeting women who were from Rwanda, the genocide is a part of their reality. They had parents who fought in the war. They had pictures of uncles, because we had to do this thing called a sounding, where every fellow had to kind of talk about themselves, show pictures, get to know you. And it was just amazing, things that you read about in the newspapers, that you see online. This is their reality. There was one particular colleague who, her mother, she's from South Africa, and her mother fought, in the whole fight against apartheid. And she talked about her mom leaving her with her grandparents to go to to be a part of this struggle, and how she felt, and how she felt abandoned, and how she felt like, how could my mom, and that it took her years to understand that her mom was fighting for a better life for her, a better South Africa for her. And having traveled to South Africa, my dad is a very big, was all about Black power growing up, right? So that perspective is something that frame of reference I'm familiar with. But I never ever thought about the people, how family lives were affected.
Yeah.
So we exalt the Nelson Mandelas and the freedom fighters, but painful personal decisions had to be made by many of these individuals, and their offspring are now our colleagues, and meeting them, and they're like, yeah, I was the child that was left behind. And that was, and it was amazing. There was one particular girl, her project was potable water for persons in the remote hills of Peru. And she talked about growing up in a poor village, and that the mining companies would pollute the waters, and that she never had clean water growing up. And it made her, it influenced her decision to pursue a degree that concentrated on clean water and all of that. And just now she's got a grant for 2,000 reservoirs in the remote hills of mountains of Peru to bring clean water to her people. I was just like, how on earth? So of course, now when you hear people talking about those things, and I'm like, yes, pensions, retirement. I'm just like, how do you make this sexy, right? Because clean water, people get that, right?
Yeah.
People get clean water. People get sanitary supplies for girls who can't afford it. That connects very easily. Retirement security, not so easy. So I learned in the fellowship how to humanize the issue of retirement security and old age poverty reduction. So that was also exciting for me. But anyway, love talking about the fellowship. But that was a big thing for me, because I got exposure to people who I don't normally have to engage with. So that was great.
Clearly, that passion was shining through again. I love it so much. Well, Sanya, I think this even surpassed the podcast, right? Like, this was so engaging, and it was just a deeper exploration of themes that we were just able to touch on in the podcast. So I'm so glad we did this. And thank you guys for showing up and engaging. I love the questions that you got.
Thank you.
We're going to do this every month. We have a podcast episode. We do a live with the guest, or with me or Warren. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for coming, Sanya. And we will see you next month.
All right. Bye, Sandra.
Bye.